Hi guys, welcome back. We are working today on a 2004 XC90. It's in park mode, so that noise you've just heard may be a little bit alien to you, but that is the parking brake. And the problem if you use park mode in your automatic, as a lot of people have experienced over the years, is that they can seize in place. Now, the cable itself is a pretty standard metal cable running through a plastic sleeve, and as you can see with this replacement one here, it should move nice and freely in the sleeve. If you leave them, don't use them, then they can rust, they can seize, and then you end up with all sorts of problems. Mainly that the car can't activate the handbrake hard enough to pass your annual inspection. That's exactly the problem I've got with this particular vehicle. So I noticed that nobody else on YouTube has at this point covered the full procedure, including removal of the center console and extraction and replacement of the cable, and then a full service on the handbrake. So I might as well take you on that journey with me today. Bear with me, I'll cut most of the chatter out of this, so let's get on with it. Okay, first things first, into the back of the car. Reach down the bottom here, pull that lever and remove the centre box. Underneath that there is a piece of carpet. Grab it with a pair of pliers, or use a bone tool if you prefer, to remove that piece of carpet. Now we need to remove these two trim pieces. They just pop out. The plastic clips hold those in place. Same on the other side. Nice and easy. So once you have the two Torx bolts out of here and the two out of here and here, we're now going to lift the gear lever up. The gear lever surround rather. Then what we can do is we can actually unclip this piece here. Now there are 4 little clips, just see them here, and if you pop those out, then the whole of the gear lever surround will pop out. It's super difficult to do this with one hand, just to show you, but that's the two at the front. And then the back. Now, that will now pop out, and that means this is with the gear lever even in park mode, and that means that we can now remove the whole of this and not interfere with the gear lever, which you can notice here has some cables attached onto the bottom of it. So it's better to do it this way if you can. So having removed the surround from the gear lever here, that gives us access to the last 2 Torx screws, one here and one here. And with those out, I'm just going to switch the engine on. I'm going to pop the car in neutral, and we should be able to kind of lift this piece up and out, and then you have just one wire to release. There you go, completely removed. Drop that in the back, and then we've got full access to all of the bits we need without risking any of these wires. And the one that you absolutely don't want to touch, well, either of them, are these 2 here, because those terminals into that solenoid break off real easy. You can see these ones here have been soldered back on, but yeah, you want to be very, very careful to avoid putting any strain on those wires, particularly those 2 at the back. Alright, so separate this, lift the whole of the rest of the unit away, and now you've got free access to everything that you need to work on. Okay, so here's the mechanism. That's the cable that goes onto the foot pedal. There's an adjuster just up there. This is a splitter that connects onto the 2 cables that go to the rear wheels. See there how it tensions and then releases. Now what should happen is that the springs in the brake mechanism at the back should pull this cable back through and reset the mechanism, but that doesn't appear to be happening. So as I say, it's working well on the left hand side, but the right hand side, that cable is toast. You can use a 13mm open-ended spanner here just to help with this. But what we need to do is just reduce a bit of the tension so that we can wind this piece that way. As I say, the 13mm spanner is your friend with this. Okay, now we've got a bit of sight of the end of that clip. I can just pop that out of there. As I say, standard E-clip on this one, but yours may be different. And then what we need to do to release this is wind it all the way back down there, and the circlip stops this unwinding accidentally. So this detensions the cable. You can hear the click there, and see this bit here has kind of released itself. So all the tension's now out of the cable. And now that's been detensioned, I can now unhook the dodgy cable from the end of the separator. So now we're onto the brake assembly itself. Now the reason I'm doing this slightly back to front is that last weekend I already changed the pads and freed up the mechanism, thinking that the problem was probably that. Turns out it's not. Okay, so we're going to go into the top here, and I'm going to remove that and the other one a little bit further down there. These hold the brake caliper on, so I'm going to take the caliper off in its entirety by removing the caliper carrier bolts. Now I'm going to start off on these with quite a large wrench here, and this is going to be glued in with thread lock. Always remember the thread lock when you're putting these things back together. But it's a 14mm, and word to the wise, once you've loosened it off a little bit with the heavy duty tool, move on to a ring spanner, because otherwise you'll never get this thing out against the spring. It's a really tricky little angle to get at. Okay, now you can release the bleed nipple here and let some of the fluid out to open things up a bit if you've got a real lip on the edge of your wheel, but this should just come off. And when it comes off, a little wrinkle for you here, you don't want to hang this on anything. Well, you don't want to hang it on this pipe, but if you tuck that pipe up behind the strut there, you can actually feed this in and sit it nice and secure on top of the strut there. Okay, so the next job is this little bolt here, which is really just to hold the thing in position during the assembly process. Little 10mm bolt, actually no force on it at all. And then we should, even though this is seized in one position, should be able to pull that off. Okay, so we have a spring here, there's a spring at the back, and there's a spring top and bottom. The spring top and bottom are a very particular shape. I recommend that you get some spares of these before you start this job. I'm going to replace the shoes, I'm going to replace the springs, and I'm going to replace the cable and indeed the spreader. Now, one of the big problems that you get with these cars is this mechanism right here. Now this is nice and clean. I cleaned this up last weekend, which is why I knew that the cable must be the only remaining problem in this particular system, and which is why I opened with the center console. You'd usually start here. That is the gadget that, when the cable pulls on the end of it, separates and pushes the two shoes against the inside of the hub. And whilst you can buy all sorts of fancy damn tools to do this particular job, a pair of long nose pliers is really all you need. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove this spring at the front. As I say, I do have spare springs for these, so you don't have to be too precious with them. If you do, you have to be super careful if you don't, and if you don't have spare springs, they will let you down, particularly the ones that hold the shoes in place. So I'm not going to be particularly precious about this. As I say, I'm just going to unhook it, and I'm going to do the same with the one at the front in a sec. So I'm going to leave this spring on at the front here. Now I'm going to remove these. Okay, so here's how these things work. The spring goes through that slot, sticks out the back. You compress the spring as you're pushing it into the receiving piece here. That hooked end goes into the receiving piece and is then slid forwards, and as you can see there, hooks around the front end. Just zoom in on that so you can see what's going on. So to release it, we have to push it forwards, move it across, and then pull back out of that slot. And the challenge you're going to have is if it's slightly angled, it's going to be hard to get out. It'll basically get stuck behind and you won't be able to remove it. The little trick is that that bar on the end there lines up. So as long as you know what angle that is, you know what angle that is. And because we're grabbing that with the long nose pliers, it makes everything a lot easier to figure out what's happening behind that shoe. But that is all you have to do to get them out. Now at the front, there is usually a H-shaped piece. On this I actually have a spreader that allows a bit of extra adjustment. Very, very useful gadget. I'll come to that another time. Let me know in the comments down below if you want to see a video of what they're all about. And then at the front, just move you over. You can see now, I'm just going to work this around, and then the shoes come off. Now to show you what's going on with this, it's actually easier to use a fresh one. If you get the original Volvo ones, you get a new cable clamp as well. You don't get that if you buy aftermarket. So this here just hooks into the cable that way there. As I say, this is the main problem with these brakes. If this is rusted solid, and they do because road salt can get in all around here, then when you press the pedal, let's say you don't use it through the course of the year, you just use the parking brake on the gear lever, you go and press the pedal, or the guy in the annual test centre does, the MOT test centre in my case. The problem you've got is it'll open and that pushes the shoes apart and engages the handbrake, but it won't actually release, and you've got a real problem. Now here is the root of the problem in this car. That is the end of the brake cable, and I should be able to fairly freely move that in and out, but I'm having to use a huge amount of force here to actually move that. That is my problem. It's completely seized, and the little springs that reset the mechanism after use don't have the grunt required to work against that force, so I'm going to replace that cable. Next up, we need to actually get the old cable out. Okay, so working under the car now, never take any chances, always use really solid axle stands. That's a 3-ton axle stand and very securely located. So you can see the exhaust there. Once we come up, you come to this shielding piece, and the cable on the right hand side here anyway, the cable runs alongside that. So you can just unclip that, that's nice and easy. There is a bracket, just 2 bolts hold that in place there, and then it tracks up and into the back of the hub assembly. To get the cable up and through here, it can be helpful to release this Torx T20 or T25, I forget which it is, or you can just feed the cable up and through there. And there you can see the rubber grommet where it goes through the, I'll say bulkhead or file or whatever you want to call it. Right, so you can, it is possible you can work around here. That's the brake cable there, so we can just about refit that through this slot, but it's very, very tight. Anyway, if you want to avoid moving that plate, you can. You just have to feed it through that hole. Okay, and as I say, you can see the rubber grommet there that stops moisture getting into the footwell of that first row of seats. So the cable tracks to the back there. You can see the anchor point, and on genuine cables you will have a bracket that matches that. Okay, so looking at it from the other side now, it tracks around through there, and you can see there that white plastic end is the end of the cable as it goes into the back of the hub assembly. There is a little ear on it, you'll notice, that little tab sticking out to show you how it needs to be located, and it's just a pressure fit. So to release this from this end, I'm just going to push that down and pull it back. There is a grommet in here as well, an O-ring, that is supposed to stop it from allowing moisture through. You can see on this one the O-ring there is pretty badly perished, so my guess is salty water has got up into the cable itself. Now, one other thing to note here is we have these clips on this bar here, and the way that you release those is you push them from underneath, and they just hook off over the top, and then to refit them you just go the other way. So yes, as I say, to refit, just like that, and that keeps it in the right place. And the only bolts that we have to deal with are on the bracket attached in line on the cable. Now, one other super important little wrinkle for you. What I've got here is a couple of meters of MIG welder wire. You can use any wire basically. I am going to wrap this round and then duct tape it on as well, because what I need to do is ensure that the way that this routes through the various different holes in multiple bulkheads, bit of a pain. I don't want to have to take the carpet out, I don't want to have to take the rear seats out, any of that nonsense. I'm basically just going to attach a bit of wire on, pull it through, take the wire off, attach it onto the new cable and then pull it back. So you've just got to make sure you've got enough wire that it can reach all the way through. That's going to be just a couple of feet, but yeah, little trick for you there that saves an awful lot of mucking around. So underneath the vehicle here there are a few clips that the cable just pops into, and they're just friction fit, so they pop out. And then, as I mentioned before, we've got this rubber piece in the bulkhead that you just work out with a screwdriver and pull the cable through. Now, let's see. There we go, there's the end of the piece of wire with the duct tape. There's the rubber grommet. And there's the hole that needs to go back up through. Most importantly, the route back up through is protected. So to pull the next wire back up through, I'm just going to yank on the end of that. Okay, so back under the car. Okay, so we're back underneath now, and that's a 12mm socket required to remove that particular bolt. So all I need to do now is transfer the wire that feeds back into the car from one to the other and pull the new one back up. And here it is at the other end, so that's the cable coming through, giving us the line we need to follow back up through the bulkheads. That's the end of the old beaten up cable. There's the end of the nice new shiny cable, so that'll be going straight back up, and slightly different design there of the grommet. Hopefully that'll do the same job or better. Okay, so I'll see you back up at the top. Okay, that's positioned. Now from the top, just cross everything you've got and hope you can feed it through. Now take your time with this bit. Don't stretch and snap your wire, that would be a real problem. If you end up getting stuck, if it feels like it's jammed, take these two bolts out here and lift this plate up and out of your way, because it's entirely possible that what's happened is it's just slightly off alignment, and you'll be able to correct that with a screwdriver. Let me just lower you down here and you'll see what I mean. You see that there? So that's where the cable comes through the bulkhead, and if it's slightly offline, then you might need to just push it over to the side with a screwdriver. With that lined up, we should be able, there you go, should be able to pull that through. Fantastic. Right, okay, back underneath and we'll go and button it back up. Okay, that can be a bit of a pain, but keep working at it, you'll get there in the end. And then we've got these clips that just pop back in on the bottom of the pan here. One mounting bracket goes back on there, 12mm, and then we're onto the back end, feeding it back into the bottom of the hub. Okay, so one last job to do before I can button this back up proper, and that is that this clip on the end that attaches onto the, let's call this the spreader, the actuator, this needs to be transferred from that onto the new one, unless you've gone for an OEM part. If you've gone for the Volvo original, you get a fresh one. You might be able to get a bit more. There you go, it clicks into place. Super. Okay, next up, let's get this back into the hub. Oh, one other thing to point out, the click that you heard is the little clip that holds this in place, so if you are removing the old one, you'll need to prise that up before you can push that out. Okay, so just bear that in mind. OEM brake actuators, they come with a new clip. Definitely the better way to go if you can, because rust is the problem in a lot of cases with these mechanisms. And I'm not going to put that clamp on just yet, that goes on right at the end. First, I'm going to feed the cable into the hub assembly. You can always use the one on the other side as a reference point for routing if you want to. But what I need to do here is I need to feed this with the tab facing downwards, that little ear in that slot. Okay, so that's it located. I'm just going to twist. Drop that in there, and then just to locate this, I'm going to just tap it with very gently with a large flat-bladed screwdriver and a wooden mallet. I say these things, you're supposed to be able to push them in by hand, but you never can. That's it, properly seated. So now we can put the 12mm bolt back into the retaining bracket. Just going to whiz this on with an impact driver. And that's the undercar work done. One last thing just to check is that the rubber grommet is properly seated in the bulkhead there. Okay, the moment of truth. Now this was completely seized, oh there you go, completely seized on the old cable, that one there, you can see rusted absolutely solid, and even with a lot of force on there I can't actually get that to move. So yeah, the cable had seized in the sleeve. Now these things can be a real pain to refit, but what I can do here, since I've got a liberal coating of grease on it, is use the long nose pliers once again just to locate that and then push that back into place. Now all of the contact points where the pad is going to be touching, you want to get a good coating of grease onto. Of course you want to avoid touching any of the bits that could contaminate the brake part of the shoe itself. So really important that you don't get any grease on this bit. So next up, I'm going to take the shoe, hang the big spring from that, and then I'm going to put the other shoe on the other end of that and feed it through. This is quite a heavy spring, but you can pull them apart just with a bit of leverage. But what we need to do here is we need to get that spring in behind the spreader there. Effectively it goes in here. So take your time, make sure everything sits nicely, and as you can see here, that's how it's going to go in the end. But it's just easier to start off, believe it or not, with that spring in place. Now if you're working against tension, and by that what I mean is if you haven't actually freed up the other end of the mechanism, this can be a really awkward job. But because this is flopping around nicely, it's not offering too much resistance. This is definitely still a job you need to be super careful with though, because it's really important to avoid contaminating the new pad with any of that grease that we've liberally doused around. Oh, there we go. Okay, so that's the shoe hooked at the bottom and at the top into the slots in the spreader. Let me just show you that one more time on the old one. So that is the mechanism, setting like that. One pad goes in here, the other one goes in here. Okay, remember as before, I'm going to grab hold of that flat section using the long nose pliers there, push it in, across and forwards. Okay, that's in, work it forwards, and release. Look over the top, you can see that that's hooked in place. Now before I put the bottom one in, I'm just going to relocate the spacer on the right hand end. Now on many, this is just a H-shaped piece of metal, this rectangle with two slots cut out of it. With this one, it gives you a little bit more room for manoeuvre. That goes at the top, and you can access that through one of the wheel lug holes. So just means that you don't have to strip it down to adjust it, which is super useful. Now with these things, you need to put a bit of grease in the ends, of course, the contact points, and make sure it's wound in all the way, otherwise you won't be able to get your hub back on. So that, fairly tricky thing to fix, but it slots in at the bottom, slots in at the top, and then holds everything true. Now I find it's easier to put one of these springs in place before locating that piece, because that at least gives you one end held nice and firm, and once you've done that, the bottom should be lined up. So once again, this goes in, pushes, locate that forwards, and then release. That's held nice and tight. So finally, now that we've got the spring on the front, spring on the top and bottom, one last spring to go on. Dead easy to forget this one, but super important that you don't forget this one, otherwise you won't be able to get the wheels back off, because as soon as you push the hub on, this is going to kind of expand into place. With this one, grab it like that, so the pliers are going perpendicular to the direction of the spring, because we're going to need to bend it around and hook that one on like that. As I mentioned before, the beauty of these adjusters is that you can adjust them without even having to take the hub off, which saves an awful lot of time. So that allows you to just, once your pads start to wear away, give them a little bit more life, extend the service life anyway. But what I want to do right now is adjust it all the way down nice and tight. And so we've got the front and back springs on, top and bottom springs on. For now we can refit the hub. Just a point of note, before you refit the hub, just put a wire brush around that slot there, because that's where the pads go. So if you've got any dust or debris in there, that's going to compromise the efficiency of the brakes. Little locating hole, important to know where it is. Now I'm going to put this at the bottom, because it's all going to be spring loaded, but the weight of the hub will help me to line it up. Push that back on. Now I'm going to use 3 of the wheel lugs to actually locate this, not pull it into place using that tiny little 10mm screw, because if you bolt rather, because if you do that, it will die on you. So now the little hole at the bottom is perfectly lined up. We can just whiz that in by hand and nip it up really loosely, just with a little ring spanner. It's a 10mm. Doesn't need a lot of force. So that's all done. Effectively ready for the wheel to go back on once I put the brake caliper back. So I'm going to put the brake caliper back on right now. Remember with this, it's very, very important to use thread locker. And you need to torque these back up to factory spec. Now I'll put a link in the description also to a video I did on servicing brakes, which shows all of that good stuff, but I'm just going to pop this on and I'll torque it up off camera. Using a high strength thread locker for this. And exactly the opposite of when we took them off, I'm just going to wind this on just with a little ratchet spanner and then torque it up. As I say, took it up off camera, but really important to make sure that these are well seated and to spec. And the last step, of course, is to relocate the little clip that holds the ABS sensor and roll this back into the fork as well, so it's this kind of rubber grommet thing. Okay, so here we are back in the front. I can just clip off this wire that serves its purpose. Okay, so the next thing to do is to tension it all, but I'm just going to push this in 2 clicks before doing that, just so there's a little bit of room for manoeuvre. Right, so as before, I'm going to hold on to this with a 13mm, and I'm now going to wind this the other way, anti-clockwise, until we can see the slot there that the circlip goes into. That's it there. Now the 13mm back on. I'm going to wind that down tight against the circlip. Right, so that can't detension itself anymore, it's locked in place. And what we need to do now is we need to take up the slack in the cable that goes down to the foot pedal. And the way that you do that is by pulling the 2 pieces apart. But it is super difficult to do this, so we need to use some leverage. So we need some different size spanners to go in here and kind of prise this apart. Again, you can start the ball rolling with the long nose pliers, and you'll hear a series of clicks as this tensions up. There we go, nice. Okay, so now when we release that cable, now there's a little bit too much play in that. Depending on which inspector you get, they may or may not enforce the maximum of 5 clicks on the handbrake, so I'm just going to adjust that again. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually just put it down 1 click, see how we go. The target is 4 or 5 clicks to maximum engagement. Failing that, what I could do, as I've got the back wheels still off, is I could just tension one or two clicks with a screwdriver on each side, just to expand the handbrake shoes within the hubs. Okay, so if we just look over the top there, you can see it's pulled out a little bit further. And now when I press the pedal, that's it, there's 5 clicks and it's done. That's fully engaged. Nice. Okay, center console back in. Okay, so now we can feed the center console back in. Connect it at the front first. If for whatever reason these bits don't line up on both sides, it's almost invariably because these holes here are not central. more like that. So just make sure it's nice and central, push it forwards to lock it into place. 2 screws here, 2 screws here, and the 2 at the front. Clip everything back down and you're done. There you go. So I hope that's been useful to you today. If it has, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Cheers.